In this video, I'm going to explain what a journal is in the context of accounting. So what is a journal? So imagine a large book, which can also be known as a ledger, containing many sets of instructions as to which account to debit and which account to credit, with an explanation of the purpose of each action. One journal ledger per set of accounts. So the image I've chosen to use here is actually a very old image, but I think it illustrates the purpose. Nowadays, journals are probably going to be held in a computerized document, but historically they would always have been in a book, a ledger, just as you see here. Now the word journal comes from the French jour, meaning daily, and the journal would have a set of instructions working chronologically, showing every day exactly what accounts to debit and to credit and why. So the next term we need to understand is a journal entry. So the journal itself is the book, and a journal entry is the set of instructions, one set of instructions. So I've got an example here of one journal entry, and we've got quite a lot of information here. Let's pick our way through it. So we are being told the date it occurred, debit and credit. So we're being told to debit the bank account with $15,000 and credit the capital account with $15,000, and also a description of why this is happening. So I want you to imagine an accounts department with two people in it. One is an experienced bookkeeper or accountant, and another is a very junior member of staff who's capable of posting into the double entry system, but not necessarily capable of understanding why and which accounts to debit and credit. So if you can imagine, the experienced accountant is writing up these instructions and then passing them to the inexperienced accountant to say, go ahead and do this. So what the inexperienced accountant will do is they will simply write in these figures into the accounts that have been shown here, and then for future reference, anybody who doesn't understand why a particular transaction has happened in the accounts, they can go back to the journal and have a look, and they can see, oh, yep, on April the 1st, £15,000 went into the bank account because of Mr. Burnham's deposit into the bank account. Obviously, Mr. Burnham must be the owner of the business, because that's why the amount is going into the capital account to show as a credit, in other words, to show as an amount owed back to the owner of the business. So I've expanded the page now to show the full page from the journal, and what we can see here is that there's the journal entry we were looking at for that day, and then moving forward through the month of April onto the 7th, the 9th, 15th, etc., we can see a number of additional instructions going from the experienced accountant to the inexperienced accountant, telling them exactly what accounts to debit and to credit and why. So here's our explanation of exactly what's happening with each journal entry. The journal itself is often called a book of prime entry because it's the first place the entries into the accounts are recorded. It's also a subsidiary ledger as well. So ledger just means many pages, large book. And you might come across this term, a book of prime entry. Now, nowadays, a lot of systems are computerized, and a computerized system can guard against mistakes. So what you find generally now is not every single transaction is written into the journal, but largely the extraordinary ones are. So commonly you might find journal entries just for things like setting up accounts with opening balances, unusual transfers between nominal accounts, correction of errors certainly, and year-end adjustments. So journal entries are used for out of the ordinary or extraordinary transactions. Now what has happened is the word journal entry has been compressed, and you'll often hear a journal entry referred to as just a journal. It's just a shortened version of journal entry. The journal itself really is a separate book. So even if you have a computerized system, you may still have a separate book or file somewhere on your computerized your computer, just with the journal entries. It's very useful for the reason I gave earlier, which was as a set of instructions to an inexperienced person as to what to do. It's quite common for a company to have their accounts and for the bookkeeper to defer to their internal accountant or an external accountant. That accountant will write the journal for them, and then the inexperienced person will just post it to their book. So that's the journal entry. But the journal itself, if someone were to come in and audit the accounts, for example, and they saw a really unusual transaction and they don't understand why it's occurred, then what they can do is refer to the journal, find the correct entry in the journal where there should be a detailed explanation of why something has been posted. So let's look at an example of when you would use a journal entry, and we're going to use it to open a set of accounts. So let's just say that T Smith has been running their business on a paper system, and they are going to perhaps move to they've been running their accounts on a single entry system, and they now want to move on to a double entry system, and they've presented us with this simple information about the status of their accounts at the start of their financial year. So the first thing we need to do is transfer this information into debits and credits. Now we're going to be using our accounting equation to do this. So everything that we've ever learned about debits and credits and the accounting equation comes into play here. So I've just drawn myself up a little grid to allow myself to do this. So I know that the capital account will always be a credit. I also know that bank, money in the bank, stock and vehicles are assets to the business. So credit is a liability, capital is a liability, and these are assets. So I'm going to put them into my debit column. And the thing about a journal is your debit and your credits must be equal, because that's the underpinning principle of the double entry system. So we can see here that I've got a debit column totaling 5,000, and I've also got a credit column totaling 5,000. So unless I've done the whole thing completely back to front, I can be reasonably certain that I've done this correctly because my two columns balance. So I've worked out my debits and credits, but I now need to convert this into a journal format. So this is what my journal could look like. Now you will only have one journal per set of accounts. So this particular journal entry, perhaps if I wrote the word entry, that would be a little bit more. Journal entry 001. So you can see I've given it a number, and I'm going to use that number when I post this into my accounts so that I can refer back to the journal. I've got the date. Now I've got the account names I'm going to use in my accounts. You can see stock has just switched to become purchases, and then the same values that we were looking at earlier, and then finally a description of what's happening. So this is the entry that's going to go in my journal, and then somebody's going to take that set of instructions and do the posting into the double entry system. Let's look at another example. We're going to use a journal to record a bank transfer. So we're being told that the petty cash account was topped up with £100 from the bank account. So let's look at my journal entry here. So what we have to remember is that when an asset account is increased, it is debited, and when it is decreased, it is credited. So let's simplify that. So money into a bank account, so because the petty cash account is the one that's going up, so money into a bank account will be a debit, and money out of a bank account will be a credit. So we're just showing that here as the debit of 100 to increase the petty cash account, and the credit of 100 to decrease the balance in the bank current account. And then underneath you simply see a description of why this is happening. Notice that it's, even though the journal will still work, if you wrote these lines the other way round, the credit at the top and the debit at the bottom, it's just convention to put debits before credits. Let's just do a little example here. A journal is required to show £125 of cash from the cash register being banked into the bank current account. So the assumption here is that we do already have an account in our system called cash register, and also one called bank current account. Now it's the cash register account that is going to decrease and the bank current account that's going to increase. So we know that if an asset account is increased, it's debited. So that's the one I'm going to write first. And the amount is £125. And then the cash register account, I don't need to put the word account, but I will anyway, just to make it clearer, that's going to be credited with £125. Then afterwards I'm just going to put a description. I'm missing off the dates, etc., but just doing this for simplicity. And that's my finished journal. So in many computerized systems there is a transfer button. So chances are you wouldn't write a journal to do the transfer unless you specifically wanted to have an entry in your journal to explain why money is moving. The next reason we're going to have a look at a journal is to correct entries, and it's an extremely important function of a journal or a journal entry to allow you to correct an entry. Now before I go ahead and look at an example of an entry, I just want to explain why journals can be so powerful. So let's just say, for example, an inexperienced bookkeeper who hasn't been given an explicit set of instructions has been using their own initiative and has recorded all of the purchases of stock to the wrong account. So let's just say they've recorded them all to, I don't know, the vehicles account, and it's a ridiculous example, but let's just take that as an example. If there were, let's just assume they've been doing this for 3 months, and there's 100 transactions that all have been posted to the vehicles account instead of the purchases account. One thing you could do is, if you were using a computerized system, you could go in and you could manually edit every single one of those 100 transactions to change them from vehicles to purchases. That's what you could do, but that would be incredibly time consuming. Instead, what you can do is you can write a journal and move the total that's gone to the vehicles account in one jump into the purchases account. It's much more time efficient, and also it gives you the opportunity to explain why you're doing something. So if you do it as a journal, you can put a description to say transactions recorded in error to the vehicle account, total balance being moved to the correct purchases account. So in terms of correcting errors, journal entries are incredibly useful and powerful. So let's look at this example. A bank payment of £400 has been made for insurance. However, instead of being posted to the insurance expenses account, it's been posted to the wages account, and this needs to be corrected. Now, as you become more familiar with journals and more confident with your double entry, you'll be able to write journals without necessarily going through the steps I'm about to show you. But when you're new to journals, you need to come up with some kind of method to allow you to do this. So the way I'd do it is I would start by writing down what the incorrect posting has been. So we were told that bank payment, so in other words, the bank payment means the money has come out of the bank current account, so the bank current account has been credited, it's gone down, has been made for insurance, but it's inadvertently been posted to wages, so it's gone into wages in error. So wages is an expense account, which is a debit account, so we have debited the wages account and credited the bank current account. So that's the situation in our accounts at present. and that's what we need to rectify. So what I then do is I write down what the correct transaction should have been. So the bank current account hasn't changed, that's correct, but the insurance expense account should have been debited instead of the wages account. So I've somehow got to move from this position to this position. So here's my blank journal. Now what we can see is there is no difference. So here's the wrong transaction, here's the right transaction. What we can see is the bank account is correct. It doesn't need changing. So that between wrong and right, we don't need to do anything at all to that one. So I'm going to remove that from the equation. We need to get to a position where wages has got 0 against it and insurance has got 400. And right now, insurance has got nothing against it. So the first thing I know I have to do is I have to increase my expenses, my insurance expenses account by 400. That's going to achieve this. So that's done. I'll take that one away. And then somehow we've got to get rid of the 400 on the wages account. So the way to get rid of an amount is to apply an equal and opposite amount. So if it's previously been debited by 400, if we now apply a 400 credit to it, it's going to have the effect of cancelling that amount out. So that's the next thing I'm going to do, is that. So effectively what I'm doing is that, and the overall effect on the wages account is to have a 0 balance at the end of the period. So this is what my journal will look like. I'm going to debit the insurance expenses account and I'm going to credit the wages account, and then finally I'm just going to put in a description. There we go. Let's look at a different type of correction now. So, example, postage of £12 was incorrectly recorded to the petty cash account. Oh, sorry, the petty cash and postage account as £21. So, the accounts were correct, but the amounts were incorrect. We've transposed the 2 and the 1 the wrong way round. I'm going to use the same method as before. I've written down the incorrect posting. So petty cash went down and postage went up by £21, but what we really needed was £12. There's a couple of ways I could write this journal, and I'm going to show you both. The first one is to do the correction in 2 jumps. Now this is true of all corrections. The first thing I'm going to do is reverse the error. So if I want to reverse this full amount, what I need to do is apply equal and opposite amounts. So what I'm effectively going to do is 21 there and 21 there, and that will cancel out that transaction completely and put me back to square one. So let's have a look how that would look. So postage, let's be lazy. So what did I say I was going to do? I was, oh, done it the wrong way around. I'm not going to worry about in which order I do this for now, but I'll just... So that's my first set of instructions, and that's got me back to square one, got rid of the error. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do exactly the same again. Only this time I'm going to put the correct amounts in on the correct side. Now notice I'm still doing this in one journal. That's fine, because if I were to add the totals of my columns up, my columns still total to the same amount, both debits and credits. So it's absolutely fine to do multiple jumps in one journal. So this would be, I will call that reversal. What we've done is we've reversed an error here, and then we've done the correct posting here. So reversal of error. Or I could have written, if I want to get fancy. Have I spelled that right? Yeah, I think I have. So that's the two-step method. Now the one-step method, correct that. The one-step method would be to just adjust the figures. So we are £21 too high on both sides. So if you want to bring a value down, you apply on the opposite side. If you want to increase it, you would apply a journal to the same side, but to decrease it, you apply it to the opposite side. So to bring that £21 down to 12, I would need to apply a 9 there and a 9 there. So let's just put that in. That's what my journal would look like. It would have exactly the same effect as the previous method. So hopefully now you have an understanding of some of the more basic reasons we would use a journal. There are many reasons you can use a journal, and I've just covered 3 of them. Thank you very much for listening.